Hello everyone, I'm Nika from TAFU, a teen nature conservation organization promoting personal responsibility towards nature and wildlife. Thank you all for joining us again for a special interview with Danny Green, a world-known award-winning wildlife photographer with some truly astonishing images. Danny's exceptional work has been widely published and his images are represented by some of the leading picture agencies in the country, such as Nature PL and RSPB Images. He has also been a part of several prestigious events on wildlife photography, such as Wild Wonders of Europe and 2020 Vision. Some of the most famous of his work is Story about the Atlantic Puffin. The project spanned over 5 years, during which he visited some of the most beautiful colonies in the UK, Iceland, and Norway in search of images of this iconic bird. Hope you will all enjoy listening about Danny's adventures. Welcome, Danny. Would you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, hello. Nice to virtually meet you and your audience as well. So, yeah, I've kind of been a wildlife photographer really all my life, really, more or less. I kind of started doing photography when I was about 16, and so I've been pursuing wildlife photography for the last 35 years, really. So yeah, it's been good. I've been seen a lot of beautiful places in the UK, but also travelled around the world and see some. Yeah, I've had quite a very privileged career in that sense, and seen some wonderful places and wonderful species.
Yeah, sounds amazing. Can you tell us about your background and how you got into photography?
Yeah, I was always interested in nature, really, when I was a kid. I come from a generation really where we didn't have any internet or phones, so you had to kind of make your own amusement, really. And one of the things I did when I was a kid was I used to go fishing a lot, and I was just always fascinated by seeing the wildlife by the rivers and the canals. You know, looking at things like kingfishers and water voles, and I think that's really where my love for nature came. And when I was just as I was leaving school, I got into photography, and I really wanted to just try and do wildlife photography, really. And it was always my ambition to do it as a career. And in those early days, I was obviously doing it as an amateur, and I was trying to get into various organisations like the RSPB and Nature PL, and I was sending images off, and eventually, you know, my career took off, and I did it. I started doing it as a full-time professional. I've been professional since 2000 now, so you know, just over 22 years. So.
Wow, sounds pretty amazing. What would you consider to be your biggest achievement in your career as a wildlife photographer?
Well, I think without doubt, obviously getting in a feature in National Geographic. It was in those during the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. There was obviously no internet, so most of my inspiration came from magazines. So magazines like BBC Wildlife magazine, and you know, I was very inspired by some of the leading photographers in the UK at that time. One of my favourite photographers was a guy that was based in Scotland called Laurie Campbell, and I used to look at Laurie's work and was really inspired by it. But I was also inspired by National Geographic. You know, I used to couldn't afford to subscribe to it, but you know, you used to get copies, and I was inspired by the pictures in there. And there was one photographer in particular that I really liked his work, and his name was Jim Brandenburg, and he'd done a lot of work on, you know, a lot of features for National Geographic, and I was just so inspired by him. And for me, I think it was in those early days, it set a seed for me that I was like determined to get in to the magazine. But like I say, it took me 20 years, and eventually I got my first feature published in 2012. So yeah, I think that was probably my greatest achievement from a business point of view. It was obviously you kind of like, you know, building up your portfolio, and then and then moving into like teaching, really doing workshops and tours and things like that. But I think really that was my the National Geographic feature was my ultimate achievement, really. And I've obviously tried to get in again since, but it's very, very difficult. It's you have to a lot of time commitment to be able to do it, really.
Mm. What did you feature in the National Geographic?
So it was on the feature on puffins, and so I kind of went. I started out. I was always interested in photographing seabirds, and over the years, I've built up what I considered a decent portfolio of puffins. And but at the time, I was working on otters as well up in the Shetland Isles and the island of Mull, and I sent two submissions off to them. One which was on otters, and I just got a response back from the editor of the magazine saying, you know, kind of nice portfolio, but unfortunately we've commissioned another photographer to do otters, so they were committed to him doing that. But then he came back and said, but we're actually really interested in your puffins, and so where, you know, he kind of asked me where I could take it and move from there, and I just basically said I could do a lot more, and I'll get back to you at the back end of next year. And so I then kind of set aside all summer to go and visit various locations and colonies just to photograph puffins, and so I kind of it went from there. It kind of ended up turning into a 5-year project, and that was the demands that they wanted for it, really. So,
Wow, sounds like. But would you consider that a challenge, or was it more? I don't know.
yeah, I suppose. I mean, the challenge is really, Nick, you've already put the groundwork in. You've already been to a lot of these locations because you've worked on them over the years, and so in a way, you're experienced about what you can achieve or what you can do. So, you know, so it's not a good idea to say, you know, I'm going to photograph a certain species and you never had any you know, any experience of it, or you've got any pictures of it. So I always think it's best to work with what you know and what you know best. And obviously I knew a lot of good colonies in the UK, and so I could arrange to spend more time there and then be able to work with different things. So I mean, the challenge really was getting to some of the colonies where I mean, my biggest challenge of it is actually the puffin is one of probably the most photographed birds in the world, because it's such a beautiful, iconic subject, and lots of people want pictures of them. And you see, you know, thousands and thousands of really, really good images of them. So the challenge really is to how can you photograph them in a different way? You know, is there bits of behaviour that's not been photographed before, or different lighting conditions or different settings? And so my challenge was to go to different locations which are really obscure and where people haven't been, because that way I could then produce a unique body of work of them. And also by spending that amount of time, you know, 5 years on them, I was capturing behaviour that had rarely been seen. And so that was the real challenge of it all, really.
It sounds very amazing, though.
Yeah, I think it's the challenge, really. I found it's not really a challenging thing, because the more time you spend with a subject, the more time you spend photographing one species over a long period of time, things will just unfold, and you will then capture them, you know, unique images, really, which is, you know, I just think it's all about a waiting game and a time. You know, it's very time consuming, but there's things you can do, I suppose. So,
yeah. What inspired you to become a wildlife photographer?
I suppose you know, your classic Attenborough documentaries. You know, he's not only inspired the older generation, you know, I can remember seeing Attenborough TV programs in the 70s, and I was just so inspired by what I was seeing there, and then of course having that love for the natural world, you know, then takes on to a new meaning. So the magazines that were being printed at the time, things like National Geographic and BBC Wildlife magazine, and you know, these organisations are still going. David Attenborough's still making TV programs, and these magazines are still you know, producing the work. So they're kind of in a way inspiring the next generation. And so yeah, that was kind of my inspiration. I think also just watching and looking at and studying other photographers and what they were doing at the time, that was a great inspiration to me.
Yeah. Could you maybe walk us through like your typical day out in the field, like from preparation to even post-processing?
Yeah, kind of. So what I tend to do, I'm not a photographer that wants to photograph every species that you find in the UK. You know, I'll pick a subject and then I'll work with it. You know, and I suppose in the way that subject's got to have a appeal to me as well, because that way I put in more time. I'm more interested in achieving the images. I've got nothing against dung beetles, but I think, you know, spending 5 years photographing dung beetles, I think can't think of anything worse. But doing something like pine martens, which I've been photographing now for, you know, for the this is hopefully it's going to be my next feature for National Geographic. So I'm kind of still working with pine martens and slowly doing it. So, you know, if I was usually I kind of photograph pine martens in stages. So I don't photograph them every day or all year round. You know, I'll work look at the gaps that I have in my diary, and then I'll work around it. So I might go and spend, you know, 6-8 weeks working with pine martens and then achieving different images. So what I tend to do is look at my portfolio that I've achieved in the past, see where I can improve on it, or also what I feel like I'm missing, you know, maybe some bit of behaviour or something that's kind of missing from it, or different lighting conditions, or photographing them in a different way. And you know, so I kind of look at, you know, lenses and setups. Maybe I'm, you know, done too much stuff with a long lens, so got too many portraits. So maybe I could do something where I incorporate the environment and so on. So I'm constantly looking at that sort of work. But usually when I'm out in the field, I could spend weeks just waiting for a certain picture, and so my day-to-day running of it can be quite boring because I don't do a lot. So I'm just waiting for that image to go, you know, go through really. I mean, post-processing, I don't do a lot. I'm not. I am actually of that generation where we kind of missed out on computers and phones. So luckily, I've got 2 children that can teach me how to set my phone up or my laptop, and you know, it's been quite exhilarating doing things over Zoom. You know, and you know, I never even knew you could do things like this. So technology-wise, it's pretty basic. So my processing is pretty non-existent really.
So when you're doing a specific project, do you ever like, if you're like waiting for the pine martens, do you get distracted when you see something else and photograph that for a bit if they're not there?
Yeah, you can do. Sometimes I might set up when you're trying to photograph like a predator, like a pine marten, you if you're lucky, you might get a 10 or 15 minute opportunity to photograph them. And so then spending all day, every day waiting, it's you know, it's quite a thing. So what I tend to do is I'll have a few other things maybe that I'm working on. So if something like a pine marten, for instance, it's mainly active in the evenings or early mornings. So during the day, I might be looking at other subjects. So I might be you know, trying to photograph some birds on a breeding lock, or even setting up just a garden bird feeding station, so I could then photograph some birds coming to that and photographing in a different way. It just kind of occupies your time. So it's always best to have, 2 or 3 projects on the go at the same time, really. But what I try to do is I try not to get too bogged down with them other projects. I'm still really, really concentrating on the ultimate aim, which is to work with pine martens. So
yeah. I don't want to say. How long would you say the typical project length is? Like, does it vary hugely, or well, it probably does, but
yeah, it does. I mean, sometimes if these days you very rarely get commissions from people to kind of work, but one of the best commissions I got was from RSPB Images, and I was my goal was to really go around to various starling roost sites around the UK. So working on the Somerset Levels, or down in Brighton, or up in on the borders of Scotland, around kind of like on the estuaries up there. So I was, because they were limited with how much they could spend and limited how much they could give me, I had to have a very short window of doing that project. So, but in the end, I ended up probably spending about 4 months working with them and visiting various locations. I never got paid for the 4 months. That was just something that it was professional pride to try and get the best images that I could possibly get. They probably only paid me for a few weeks of working, but so it's quite difficult to have a time limit. Something like the pine martens, I suppose, in a way, I probably never really feel like I've got a time limit on it. I'll just keep going until I've exhausted it, really. So
sounds pretty amazing, though, especially because you can do more at once, which allows you to have diversity, I suppose, which is nice.
Yeah, I think the trick is to plan. So I find myself planning my year well in advance. So I kind of know what I'm doing this year, and I've got I kind of juggle all sorts of avenues. So I'm working on a book at the moment, and I have no time limit of when I do this, but I'm moving between working either on pine martens or working towards the book, or even just running my day-to-day business. So a lot of my income comes from doing workshops or running holidays, photographic tours, and that's kind of like my bread and butter. And it's I have to do that. It's I can't not do them. So everything else fits around that, really. So it's a bit of a juggling act of getting your business into that sort of thing. So I always advise people, if they really want to get into photography, is don't just concentrate on one aspect of it. Have lots of things where you can juggle. So if something doesn't quite work or work out, it's not a disaster. You've got the other things that are in the pipeline as well. So
yeah, that makes sense. What do you when you're photographing your images or doing your other work, do you think about nature conservation when you're doing it? And
all the time. I kind of it's quite sad. I kind of seen over the years, when I first started photographing wildlife, the local wildlife to me was, I used to see a lot of hares and grey partridges and barn owls, and really over the 35 years of still working in this area, I've seen a huge decline in all these farmland or woodland species, and so obviously nature conservation is at the core of what I try and do. I mean, it's quite difficult as a photographer, because actually when you're a professional wildlife photographer, your carbon footprint is actually quite high, because you're flying around to various places. I'm taking other people there, and so it becomes a little bit of a hypocrisy of saying, well, this is what I do as a as a living, and you know, my carbon footprint is much higher than the average person because of the flights and the travel that I do, and so you are consciously kind of working with that. But on the other side of it, you know, it's a bit like filmmakers as well. You know, their carbon footprint is really high, but if these guys or people like myself weren't doing this, then you know, you wouldn't have the images or the stories to tell and tell these things. So, you know, I think, you know, sometimes there's a balance really, and but yeah, nature conservation is at the core of really what we all do really. So
yeah. And how do you believe that the challenges in nature and wildlife conservation have evolved over the years, and what do you see as the biggest challenges facing conservationists now?
well, the biggest challenge, I mean, the challenge for photographers, filmmakers, and storytellers is getting that story out there, and it's quite easy to tell a story of say like the polar ice caps melting, and now it's going to affect like beautiful subjects like polar bears and Arctic foxes and penguins and things like that, because you know these are very, very iconic subjects that most people know, and so you know, and telling the story of like poaching of tigers and things like that, you know, everyone knows what a tiger looks like, but well, you know, for photographers, the conservationists is how do you tell the story of look what's affecting like the butterflies in the UK or you know the decline in small farmland birds? Then they're not something that is like I say it's iconic. It's quite easy to protect a giant panda because it's a cute, cuddly animal, isn't it? And but you know, telling people that you know house sparrows and starlings have declined, you know, nearly 75%. You know, people are not really that kind of interested in that. You know, conservationists are because we get and see the bigger picture, but it's sometimes what the difficulty is kind of not preaching to the converted, but getting the masses on board, and that's what the difficult thing. That's where your generation is really important for your generation to embrace things like social media and the internet and get this message out much more than relying on say mainstream media to do it. So
yeah. What would you say is the role of photography in raising awareness for these things?
well, the rule of your own photography is being passionate about what you do. That's the main thing. I think you have to have a passion and a love affair for the subjects that you're photographing, and that way it will come much easier to tell that story, and then you can kind of work to that goal and to that aim. And I suppose really, you know, conservationists are fit into that category as well. They all have their own passions and their own you know, ideas. You know, whether you want to save the tiger from extinction or protect house sparrows in the UK, you know, everyone's got that passion on it. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Can you maybe discuss some of the creative techniques you use in photography to convey the importance of conservation or the challenges wildlife is facing?
Yeah, I kind of. Yeah, I'm not. You know, it's not for me. It's not a secret book. You know, of things. I'm quite open and honest about how I do it, and you know, and I think you know, I kind of look at some of the pictures I've done over the years, and how times have changed. I mean, when I first started doing photography, I used to do quite a lot of my bird photography, for instance, in and around the nest, you know, and so and it became, you know, a bit in like out of favor, you know, it wasn't in vogue to do that sort of stuff. And I kind of looking back, I understood it because, you know, the disturbance at that sensitive time. And so photography has moved on all the time. And, you know, and I feel photography will evolve even, you know, even further. I mean, the only thing I would say is don't get stuck down with one genre. Keep trying to move your photography on and move into different ways. So, you know, whether that's working with different techniques or different setups and photographing don't get bogged down to just working with one lens, one camera, working in lots of different ways.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so how would you balance the artistry and storytelling aspects of wildlife photography?
Well, personally, I would like to do more of it. That's why I'm really wanting to finish my book. I mean, that's, it's the biggest story you can tell really when you're putting together something like that. And so, yeah, for me, it's finding that balance. And sometimes you can get so sidetracked in taking the pictures and you end up taking all these pictures, but you still not got your story out there. So, I mean, I'm probably the world's worst at that. I know lots of other photographers are, they work on a project and it's out and then they're on to the next one. I tend to get bogged down with the project because I'm a little bit of a perfectionist and I want to try and achieve the best I can out of that certain project. So what I do is not necessarily the best way forward. It's probably not the best advice. It's try and get in and do it as because the story, we don't have that much time. If we're going to try and get the next generation of politicians on board to seriously save the climate, we don't have time to be able to sit and wait and do these things. We have to get it out. We have to get it out now, no, really. So
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, what do you believe the impact of one photographer could be in like promoting conservation efforts or raising awareness about environmental issues or even for specific species?
well, I think one photographer is quite difficult. What is you're a lone voice, and it's quite difficult. So obviously, I've been involved in some great organisations over the years. So Wild Wonders of Europe, for instance, was it was a real honour to be a part of that because it was a collective voice of photographers and media professionals that worked on the project and told really the story of this wild and wonderful place, which is Europe, and the beautiful places that needed protecting and what we can do, what we need to do to protect them as well. So I always think an organization like that is super. Also, your own what organization. It's a great way of being able to kind of get together and tell that story as a collective. It's a much better way forward than an individual, really.
Yeah. Well, going back to individual, but also communities, like how can they both support conservation efforts and help protect natural heritage?
Well, it's I mean, there's lots of different ways you can do it. I think as a collection, maybe work on a project and come up with the idea of doing it. Maybe there's it might be just a wetland that needs protecting, or just some woodland that is in danger of being bulldozed because of the new block of flats that's being built. But you can go on to the small scale end of that, or you can like do things what you're doing. Like I know you run a competition, don't you? And that's for me that's like important to have like that conservation minded approach to competitions as well. It's I think really we all like seeing stunning, beautiful pictures of wildlife, but in a way they don't really have a story there's not a story to tell. They're great from a visual aspect, but some of the best stories out there are the ones that are actually working with a conservation organization. So if you're an individual and that's the way you want to go, try and get involved with that organization and try and work with that, really.
Yeah, and more of a technical aspect, but how do you not involve, but how do you create your images to actually tell a story? Because there are images rather than videos, so like you said, it's quite hard to do that.
It is difficult. It is, I mean, it's much easier to tell a story with a moving video, and as a human population using psyche, we kind of we're more attuned to moving pictures. It's what we kind of we're brought up on television and cinema, and then obviously it's no kind of coincidence that social media's evolved. It was like the still image, but now it's all videos and things like TikTok and stuff like that. That's where it all thing. Me personally, I still go on for an image, and if the image is powerful enough, it can convey that story in a single image. The real difficult for stills photographer is conveying that image in that single scene. That's the real challenge, and anyone who's like kind of really interested in stills photography, that remains and will remain the challenge going forward. It's so difficult to do it. I don't really have a single answer, but I think you'll know it once you've took the picture.
Yeah. And are there any advice or tips that you would give to aspiring photographers?
Yeah, don't give up. Just believe in what you stand for. Believe in your own images. Photography is very subjective. So you might show a portfolio of images to 10 different editors, and 9 of them editors don't like your images, but one will. And so it's finding that voice. Believe in your own work, and and stand by it. And keep persevering with it. You have to take rejection in this industry. It's just part and parcel of the game, and a lot of people, they get rejection, but then they just they give up basically, and don't carry on and pursue. And I think that's the most important thing, is like, just don't give up. Believe in what you stand for, really.
Yeah. Can you maybe share some of your successful conservation campaigns or initiatives that you've been part of, and how photography played a role in their success?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, just being part of the RSPB Images has been a huge thing for me. It's a huge conservation organisation, something I've been really proud to be part of. And I walk around various reserves, and I see these. Some of my pictures are done in the entrances, or advertising the reserves, and so for me that's a great way of doing it as well. And I also remember working with water voles, and a lot of my water vole images went kind of national, really, because they were used by a lot of wildlife trusts, and 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 that was quite an important thing for me. It was like, I felt like I was kind of give something back, even though it was on a small scale. It still felt pertinent to me, because I love water voles, and water voles had declined so drastically, and yet there wasn't at the time, there wasn't really a great set of images out there, and having good imagery is good for advertising. And in a way, you're advertising the plight of the water vole, but you need beautiful images to do that, because it grabs people's attention. If you just got an out of focus water vole behind a load of branches, it's not gonna advertise that animal, to the general masses. And so I was quite proud of how they were used for them small campaigns on a national level. I haven't quite managed to do the things on an international level, really, other than the Puffin article for National Geographic.
I suppose if there was just words on a piece of paper, it's not very attractive at all. You have to have something to
get
everyone interested.
Images is a very, very important thing, and there's a reason why advertisement agencies spend a fortune on producing artwork and imagery to advertise a certain brand of product. They know what works, and nature conservation really needs that as well. So that's why it's so important for photographers and filmmakers to supply that conservation effort, really.
Yeah. I noticed on your website you provided a quite amusing response to the question of what you would do in your next life. Could you share that with our audience too?
I can't remember what it was. What was it? Was it probably be a photographer, but a rich one, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just carrying for me, it's just carrying all the equipment. And, you know, if I was kind of a rich photographer, I might be able to pay someone to carry it for me, or yeah. So, yeah, I think you know, getting into photography or filmmaking, I don't think it's a financial reward that you know, it's more of a love affair and just a passion for it, really.
Mm.
So I mean, it is a great life. It's kind of a life that, you know, I can't believe. Sometimes I have to pinch myself that I'm actually sat here in the Arctic, photographing a polar bear, and I can't believe I'm still doing it. You know, so yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it must be pretty amazing just to go to the Arctic, not to mention getting an amazing picture of a polar bear.
Yeah, no, it's just you know, and that's kind of like my passion as well. I have a passion for areas and locations, and so I keep going back and working it. So hopefully, my new book is going to be on the Arctic, and hopefully, you know, it might inspire the next generation to, you know, even if it just inspires a couple of people to
Mm.
maybe get into photography or filmmaking or even conservation, then I suppose in a way I've done my job, you know. So
Yeah. And could you maybe like discuss like what you would say are the most important equipment, and I had another word but I lost it, that you would need in, well, photographing wildlife?
yeah, I don't think there's any. To be fair, it's nothing really that stands out because it's how you want to shoot, really. So you know, you can you, you know, to buy a long telephoto lens, you look at the price of them, and you know, they're the price of a small car, you know, and so they're expensive and out of the reach of most people. But you know, macro lenses or wide angle lenses, they're relatively cheap to buy. You know, equipment doesn't have to be expensive. You really don't need the best equipment to be a good photographer. You just need to have that ability to work the equipment you've got
Mm.
and know what you can get out of it. So there's no real you know, kind of end game to what you need. I meet a lot of photographers over the years, and they always have to have the latest and greatest equipment. But you know, you can produce some phenomenal work on some really you know, older equipment, and you know, so you don't have to break the bank for it. So there's no real answer for it. I mean, on my own personal photography, I do use a real mixture of lenses, from the super telephoto lenses down to, you know, working with wide angle stuff. And I've got into a lot of camera trap work over the years, and over during the pandemic, I was obviously bored because I couldn't get out and about. So I kind of taught myself how to work camera trap, and it is pretty basic and pretty cheap way of getting about, and but the results you can get are fantastic. So
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Could you, sort of linking a lot back to the last question, but could you discuss like any exciting new technologies or innovations that you believe could have a positive impact on nature and wildlife conservation in the future?
um, well, I think obviously equipment's getting better and better, and you know, obviously you know, whether that's the answer forward. Most camera manufacturers, they want you to buy a new camera every year. It's called consumerism, and but you know, that's consumerism, in my opinion, is one of the biggest problems for the climate change. You know, that's so, you know, whether that's I don't think that's the answer either. You know, so but I think really what I think the most important thing is to tell the story of them subjects that are, you know, species that are declining, whether it's a habitat or the single species, and that's probably the future. I think it's important that we kind of, you know, work towards that. It is it's very tempting to photograph the big iconic cuddly animals out there, but there's, you know, we need to tell the story of why are butterflies declining in the UK. You know, what is the real problem, the underlying problem there, what's affecting our wildlife in the UK? Because I've been in the industry for 35 years, I've seen a huge decline in wildlife over the years. It's actually quite frightening, Nika, how much decline it is. And I personally don't think it's too late. I think there is a hope out there. I think we can change, but we need to get rid of this mindset of that we have to have the latest iPhone, we have to have a new car, you know, a new camera. We have to get past that, because that's the only way we can to save save climate change, as you know, save climate and save the environment. We have to get out of consumerism. So
Yeah,
that's my own
definitely.
personal take on it, really.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's quite horrible, really.
Yeah.
Um, well, going back to a more technical side of things again, how would you approach capturing like the perfect shot in terms of like composition and lighting while still getting an interesting image in there?
Well, I think again, it's something that you kind of, or I've tended to do over the years, is in a way develop a certain style that suits me, and a style that my kind of work, you know, is thinking. I wouldn't say it's a unique style. It's something that's kind of just evolved over time. You know, I personally wouldn't say I'm the greatest creative photography out there. You know, I think so many others that are just superb, you know, and come up with different ideas. I tend to really shoot on instinct, and a lot of my best pictures are usually kind of, it just happens to be at the right place at the right time. So, you know, and so for me personally, I think finding that unique style, that unique way is extremely difficult. So, but the biggest advice I can give to any budding photographer is go through your portfolio and find 10 of your favorite pictures. And once you've got that 10 pictures, then ask yourself the question why you like them. And I would probably say there'll be a reason why you like it. It's because a certain composition or certain light affects it, or, you know, don't get bogged down because it's a picture of a tiger, for instance, but just, you know, because it's an iconic subject. But just say what, you know, from the photography aspect of it, pick your favorite 10. And then what you'll find is when the next time you're out in the field, you'll be consciously shooting in that same way. You'll be looking at that similar sort of composition, or working in with lighting in a certain way. So, and that's the best advice I can give to budding people. Look at your work, study it, and see why you like it, and then in a few years' time, do it again, or, you know, and hopefully your top 10 favorite images has changed. You know, that original 10 is not in there because you've evolved as a photographer, and you're moving into that style that you particularly like, and that is that's a great way of analyzing your own work, really.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So would you say that's the main way that you stay current and continue to develop your skills as a photographer?
I think so. You know, a lot of the photographers that it's quite easy to kind of build a portfolio and get recognized, but it's very difficult to stay there. So because you know, styles are changing all the time, and it becomes current. The other thing as well is sometimes the styles come in and out. You know, I always think areas come in and out of favor, and so I'm not a great believer in keep swapping and changing. Just stick to what you've got, and, you know, if it's worked for you, stick with it, because eventually it'll just come back around to that style, or to you again, or that location. So yeah,
Yeah.
so I do think, again, one of the biggest tips is believe in your own photography, and stick with it, you know.
Yeah, nice. How do you go about like researching and finding out the best locations for wildlife photography, and also how do you choose your subject?
Well, I suppose, you know, some of the easiest places to visit for wildlife photography is like, you know, the great reserves of Africa, for instance. You know, going on safari to Africa is, you know, it's a fantastic place, fantastic experience, because you see lots of wildlife, lots of subjects there. But the other difficult thing there with that is there's a lot of people that are also going there. And so standing out from the crowd, it becomes a lot more difficult. So for me personally, I like to try and study locations and subjects that have not been photographed that much before, or a location that's got a well photographed subject, but it's a different place. There's a different feel to it. So it could be a grizzly bear in a certain river in Alaska, or it could be a puffin on a remote island that no one visits in the UK, and that's how you kind of get that uniqueness, really. I think the worst thing you can do as a photographer is follow a crowd of going to the same location that everybody else is doing. The trick really is to try and find that species and location that not everyone is doing. That's how you stand out, really. So
yeah, so could you maybe like talk about an experience you had with an endangered species and working with it, and the ethical considerations that might have come with that?
I think some of my I think some of my best experiences have been working in the UK, if I'm honest with you. I'm very passionate about UK wildlife, and unfortunately, over the last 10 years or so, I've not put as much time into working in the UK because, in a way, as my career progressed, I was then traveling abroad a lot more and photographing subjects there. Not that I'm not saying I didn't enjoy it. I'm not saying I don't enjoy it, but I just felt I lost a little bit of that original spark which got me interested in wildlife in the first place. So I would personally like to get back into doing more subjects in the UK, and I've made a conscious effort to do that this over the last 2 or 3 years. I think the pandemic helped me kind of do that. It made me take a step back and look at what I was doing as a photographer and what I was achieving. And so for me, that's kind of how I've looked at things from a personal point of view. So I've been working with photographing, like I say, obviously pine martens, but also doing things like badgers, and I've really enjoyed it. It's been fantastic. I've loved every minute of it, and I love that challenge of doing it. I've kind of started working more with camera traps to work with badgers, and that's kind of really refreshed my taking photography, because it's a completely different new technique, and I've really enjoyed trying to learn it and trying to master it, really. So
yeah, sounds pretty amazing though, because I don't think I've actually seen a badger that wasn't dead.
yeah,
As far
most people are the same. So
yeah, which is quite sad. So it's
yeah.
very important to see the images of it at least.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I've no plans to do anything, but I feel like that badgers are getting a really bad deal in the UK at the moment, because of we have the authorities are convinced that badgers spread TB to cattle, and so they're eradicating badgers in certain parts of the UK, and and I think this is a huge story to tell. I think this is something that, because I don't agree with it. I don't think, we should be persecuting a much loved iconic species like the badger in the UK. There's a lot more needs to be done into the research in really what goes on, and I just think it's disgraceful that we can just, someone sat behind a desk that's got no experience of wildlife or the natural world or the countryside can just make that decision and say, well, we need to call badgers to stop the spread. I don't think that's the answer. So
Horrible.
horrible, yeah.
Could you maybe tell us about a particularly memorable moment or project you've worked on during your career?
I've just been talking obviously about photographing stuff in the UK, but I think for me the most memorable thing was seeing them photographing a polar bear for the first time. I've got to admit, I was as growing up as a kid, watching the programs. Any programs on polar bears I was obsessed with, because I just thought it was such an iconic predator, one of the largest predators on the planet. And we've been so lucky as humans to be able to share our exact time with polar bears. It's quite, it has that, polar bears have that ability for humans to be on the food chain. And so anything that can quite easily just take out a human adds that little bit of excitement. So for me, I was just fascinated by them. I just thought, I thought they were beautiful. I thought, how can an animal survive up in that Arctic wilderness, in the temperatures and the extreme environment that it has to do to survive? And so I kind of admired it as a species. I obviously was inspired by the location it lived, and for me, seeing them photographing a polar bear for the first time was amazing. And I've been back many times since, and in a way, I've become a little bit obsessed with trying to get more, different images and different things of them. So I just love them. So I think that's probably, but I think that just kind of like stems from like I say, childhood fascination in them, really.
Yeah, they're very iconic and beautiful in many ways.
Yeah, beautiful animals.
How do you manage the business side of photography, like marketing, pricing, and your portfolio as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite difficult. There's no simple answer to it. I always think, I think going back to something I mentioned a bit earlier is you need to be like a spider, really. You have lots of legs and concentrate on lots of different things. So if one thing's not working, you've put a time in and it's not worked, it's not a disaster, because all your other kind of projects and things have worked. So the trick really is in working as a business is to have that kind of thing. What you shouldn't do is spend 5 years trying to get in National Geographic with Puffins, and then not have any, you're not making any income or anything, and then if they turn you down, it's a disaster. And I can understand why photographers do something like that, but then get turned down and then completely give up, and because it's very demoralizing. But if you have lots of different avenues of how you're looking at making an income, because you need to make an income as a photographer. It's otherwise you can't survive. So yeah, it just keep having that little different thing. So whether it's writing articles for magazines or running workshops or doing teaching it online or whatever, there's lots of different ways that you can make make a career as a photographer, other than just taking beautiful pictures and trying to sell them. So
Yeah. What would you say is your favorite part if it's not if we ignore the photography?
well, to be honest with you, the favorite part is taking the pictures. So I'm terrible at the business side of it. I'm kind of it's something that I don't manage very well. I'm actually very, very fortunate that my wife works with, I wouldn't say works for me, she works with the business, and she does that a lot of that side of it, that mundane side of it, of getting the business in, putting together a selection of images for a presentation or a publication or whatever, and that's because if it was left to me, I'd still be trying to work on it, and and that's her skill set and what she does. So it does help to have someone else who can do that side if that's something you're not very good at. So
Yeah, definitely. How how would you balance and how do you balance the ethical concerns of wildlife photography with like the desire to capture amazing images?
well, it's quite difficult for me because I come, like I say, I come from that old school type photographer. You know, when I first started photographing wildlife in the 80s, you know, I was, you know, I used to do a lot of bird photography at the nest, like I said, and that nowadays is a little bit. It's not in, you know, fashion. A lot of people look down on it, but me personally, I still think done properly and done well, you don't have to have any problems with the ethics of it, because it's, you know, what is really ethical. You know, if you go to Africa, say for instance, in safari, you know, the pressure on the wildlife out there because of the sheer volume of people, you know, is that worse? You know, is it you know, it's kind of a worse way than, say, an individual that's trying to photograph you know, a kingfisher, you know, at its nest, to document that. You know, there's lots of restrictions that you need to do that sort of stuff. But, and I suppose, you know, for me, I'm kind of like wrestling with them ethics of that. You know, for me to photograph pine martens and badgers, for instance, I have to put food out really to attract the badgers to a certain area. I can then have my cameras set up to be able to get the pictures. You know, a lot of people don't like the fact that you're actually feeding wildlife to attract them for a photograph. But if I'm quite honest with you, it's impossible to photograph badgers without having that supplement food to attract them in an area. The badger wins because it gets a free handout with food. You win because you get pictures, and so I think we've kind of gone. You know, sometimes the ethics of photography is just kind of taken on. I know it's much better to go just walk out in the countryside and take a picture, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a beautiful picture. You know, it's sometimes the best pictures have already been created in your head, and you know, you've already you know, you've put a lot of time and effort in to get a badger to feed in a particular spot to be able to create that picture. And I think that's, you know, that's the difference of it. The ethics of wildlife photography will range on more and more. You know, people you know, don't like, you know, there's no way I can convince someone that says you shouldn't feed wildlife. You know, it's but you know, me personally, I don't think there's any problem with it. I feed the birds in my garden because I want to help them out in the winter. You know, I'm doing nothing wrong really in that sense. So
yeah, and some people also suggest to feed birds. So sometimes, what's the difference, I suppose?
yeah, different people have different ways and different ways of looking at it. I mean, it's, you know, sometimes for me it's like that's how I've been doing it for 35 years. So it's quite hard to teach an old dog new tricks, you know. So I kind of do get that ethics about it, but I don't think we can have that romantic view of how things should be done, you know. So
Yeah. Can you maybe talk about any future projects or plans you have in mind for wildlife photography?
well, like I say, I've been still working on pine martens. It's something that's ongoing. I'm really, you know, I'm very relaxed about it. I'm not so desperate to you know, to kind of get it, but it's something I would like to kind of do before I get too old, before I can't do it anymore. Obviously I'd like to finish the book, and that's been 10 years in the making to try and do that. And so I have lots of ongoing things. I'm just about to go to Canada on Saturday, and that's to visit a new location. I'm really excited about that. It's somewhere I've never been before. It's looking for harp seals in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and obviously that is kind of yeah, it's new for me. It's a new species, and it's a new place, so I'm excited. But also, it'll be, you know, it'll be part of the book, and you know, and that's kind of how for me. It's that excitement of trying to move the project on to completion, really. So.
Yeah. What is there a specific time frame you're hoping to finish the book by?
Hopefully the back end of next year, but I never really hold myself to time frames. I kind of give myself that thing, but really the time frame is the end of 24. So that's my real time frame.
Whenever it is, I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
And lastly, is there anything you would recommend to young photographers and wildlife and nature conservationists, or any message you would like to send to them?
Yeah, just look at lots of people's work. You know, be inspired by their work. I've been I'm still inspired by photographers to this day. You know, and I remember the guys that I used to follow when I was younger, people like Laurie Campbell and Jim Brandenburg, and these were great inspirations to me because of their photography. And you know, and I'm still inspired by their work today. But I'm also inspired by a whole new generation of photographers that are coming up, and I really like looking at photographs, and so I'm inspired by it. So always do that. Never just look at your own images and think, you know, that they're perfect, because they're not. You're always learning. Even the best photographers are always learning and trying to perfect their art, really. So
yeah, definitely.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a pleasure to have Danny, and Danny's dedication and experience and passion for nature and wildlife photography has inspired many until now. Hopefully, this interview will inspire many young people to follow in Danny's footsteps. We are very grateful for the valuable insights he has shared with us. We wish him all the best in his future endeavors and very much look forward to seeing more of his breathtaking images. Thank you, Danny, for being our guest today and accepting the invitation to be our contest jury member. So yeah, thank you. And
Yeah,
don't be responsible, guys.